Yeah.
No more secrets here. Okay, well, I'd like to start with a bow if you'd like to join me. I feel this is auspicious, actually. We're at the last two chapters of this volume on the Hinayana, and traditionally, the fruition of the Hinayana path is the discovery of egolessness, of no self, and that discovery liberates us from suffering. The experience of stepping out of our dreams and into the real world. And that is the subject of these two chapters. So, some of this, I just wanted to mention, some of this may seem abstract or far-fetched or just confusing, but I assure you that it is real and it is possible. It is possible through the development of knowledge and prajna. And that happens to be the title of this last section of the book, is knowledge and prajna. In the reading he says, as you are trying to tune yourself in to the breath or to mindfulness, and you can't do it, the reason you can't do it is because there is this sense of me-ness or I-ness. So he's talking about the meditation practice. You see, it is that sense of I, that me-ness, that is the spark, the catalyst that gets the ball rolling, the storytelling ball, the ongoing commentary that keeps going on and on. We bring our attention to the breath, but are unable to fully identify with it because of that commentary. We're watching ourselves trying to meditate. I'm following my breath. So we're not really there. We just cannot see or hear or even think clearly while all of this commentary is going on. It's like trying to see through murky water. And that is the numbness of ego, which is this chapter. But mostly we're not even trying to see through the murkiness. The fundamental characteristic or essence of ego consists of ignoring your existence, he says. We're going through life absorbed in the entertainment of the discursive thoughts. We all know now because we experience it in meditation. We're moving through life like kids absorbed in their screens, only dimly aware of what's going on. And what's going on is suffering. The suffering intrinsic in our thoughts and our dreams. All of our discursive thoughts are about conflict. All of them. Because they are all about I. I versus the world. These stories come out of the sense of I. I need this or that. I need to avoid this or that. This or that is safe to ignore. If this sounds familiar, that's the three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. When the experience of non-existence, the non-existence of self happens, when we see that it is just a story, poof, no suffering. Really, just like that. In the meantime, the stories in the commentary go on and on. They are very repetitive. The same old stories, the same old dreams that may grow tiring, even boring. He says, the quality of ego pain may manifest as boredom with yourself. The pain of carrying yourself around altogether It is as if you have this thing inside you. It's like there is another person there. And that is the watcher. I really did a good job on that one. Oh, I really messed that up. Think about it. That voice in your head. Who are you talking to? Really? Well, there is this I there. Now, if I was just who you are, there wouldn't be any platform from which to view yourself. It would be just you would just be you. He says in the reading, there is this thingy, yourself, which is not in you as a separate entity, but it is you. It is your me-ness, your I-ness. This me-ness, not meanness, but me-ness, seems to have real substance and weight. That fundamental, heavy and painful state of existence is pervasive, he says. So here we are at the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. Now, the weight of me, of I, exerts a gravitational pull on our thoughts, our feelings, and on those around us. This I, this meanness, demands that everything revolve around it, and that manifests in the language we use. He says, quote, I would like to have a cup of tea. The first thing we say is I. In doing so, we are expressing some kind of burden to the person who is going to serve the tea. This is the ego, and it's making a demand of sorts. But, he goes on to say, there is a subtle sense of shakiness when you say I. No matter how you say I, there is a little tinge of frustration and unfriendliness. See, shakiness because the essence of I is a story. And we know that on some level. Frustration and unfriendliness because I is never satisfied. He goes on to say a further aspect of I which is not so tentative, and that is when an action is attached, when there is a want or a need. He says, you express I want in the form of kleshas, such as passion, aggression, jealousy, arrogance. I want does not allow you any space to reflect on your surroundings. Your mind is completely filled with I wants. So, in the language of this, we have I and we have want. In sitting shamatha meditation, we are actually becoming aware of the nature of our thoughts and our dreams, starting to see how much time we spend working on the legend of I, beginning to get a sense of how unsubstantial I really is. And then it is with Vipashyana awareness that we begin to see how I operates with want, because we see it in action. By paying attention, by looking at things clearly, this is from the text, you begin to experience clarity and freshness. And this is the key. Because it is with clarity and freshness of the shamatha vipassana practice that you start to see that the sense of I for what it is, a story. Now, he says, it is not important for you to develop awareness. What you are aware of is more important. That's how you can step out of egohood. So once again, if I am developing awareness, well, I'm back in the game. There I am again. I am just reifying myself. He even says here, when you have meanness, you cannot develop the subtleties of awareness because you are in the way. You see, the commentary overwhelms direct experience. When something is perceived, ego goes into overdrive. How does this affect me? How long is this going on? And as long as this is going on, we cannot see clearly. It's like trying to listen to a conversation at a rock concert or listen to two conversations at once. Now, okay. Yeah. Here he says, with awareness, relaxation arises. Your mind has been processed by shamatha practice, so discriminating awareness or prajna begins to occur. Relaxation because you're not working so hard to make everything fit into the categories that you've come up with. And prajna can occur because you are no longer shielding yourself from your environment. There is greater simplicity. You're no longer tangled up in the machinations of ego, the self-referential view. You relate with things directly. You can relate with the simplicity of your life, he says. You eat when you eat, you sit when you sit, you walk when you walk. You eat when you eat. Think about that. How often do any of us eat a meal without any distraction? Tasting every mouthful, awake to all the tastes, the textures, the aroma, the warmth of the food, aware of the motion of a bit of a food on its way to your mouth and then entering it. All of this is not focused concentration. It is simple awareness. Simply being aware of what's going on right now. You could say that this is an exercise in decluttering our thoughts. And that decluttering our life follows. And that simplicity, there is also a kind of a purity that comes with that. You no longer need validation or credentials. If you give something, there is no need for a thank you. No need for feedback of any kind. You become less of a nuisance. Now, a good point he makes here is, rather than discuss it philosophically, I think the best way to understand egolessness is from the point of view of practice. For then you can see that it is possible. You see, this whole chapter is a description of the experience of egolessness. An explanation or description can be pretty useful, but it can only take you so far. So true understanding, of course, happens when you get there, when you experience it for yourself. Now, I'd like to say at this point, because this is, I think, a common misunderstanding, is that egolessness does not mean mindlessness or passivity. You don't just drift through life getting blown about by whatever winds happen to be occurring. Actually, you have more energy, and there is a kind of strength. Everything no longer needs to be about me. It needs to be about me or I. There is more room to move, more spaciousness, and more freedom. And that comes from shamatha and Vipashyana practice. It's the product of a great deal of discipline, of hours spent in the Dharma mines. persevering through whatever obstacles you've encountered, going over readings that don't make any sense, and along the way, true understanding, prajna, develops. He says, by means of great discipline, you have a way of letting go, and because of that, strength and energy arise. But not from me, and not from want. In fact, it arises because there is no me or want anymore. But in the meantime, here in the world of samsara, he makes this statement. In order to make yourself a person of the world, you had to fight for every inch. All the time you are trying to occupy territory. And what he's talking about here is we're always trying to expand the kingdom of I. It can be interesting. The next time you're present when two people meet each other, listen to what is being said. Usually each person is presenting their credentials, staking out their territory, establishing their place in the hierarchy. Most of us are not aware of the amount of aggression in many of our interactions. But as we practice and develop mindfulness and awareness, everything becomes more spacious. There's less neediness. No longer the persistent drive to solidify the sense of self. Nothing to prove. It is quite liberating. There's no need to fight for anything. What he says is, we don't have to push so hard to maintain ourselves, which only makes us deaf, dumb, and blind. So there's a real sense of relief in this. And he says that sense of relief is a glimpse of awakening. You see, we are relieved of our preoccupation with building and maintaining the legend of I. Prajna. A lot more could be said about prajna. Prajna, or discriminating intelligence. You can think of it as clear seeing, seeing through the fog of self-absorption. The watcher is gone, the commentary falls silent. He says, you just say, I would like a cup of tea. You have developed your own discipline, your own sense of dignity, and your own gentleness. And that is the introduction to Mahayana. You could say that having cleaned up your own act, you've become trustworthy, even useful. Having become trustworthy, you're not quite home free, right? Ego is still there. He talks about two problems you come up with, I and am. And he says that traditionally these two are described as the ego of individual existence and the ego of dharmas. There are two basic types of ego. Your existence as a full-fledged individual, that is I, and your existence as a full-fledged individual reacting to various situations, that is the am. Put another way, I and other. This has come up many times before. It's the fundamental duality. It's the kind of the fundamental error. We have this sense of ourselves, I, and then there is the sense of how everything relates to I. How everything relates to what is mine, as in what belongs to me. So, when we talk about egolessness, there is twofold egolessness. He introduces that saying the non-existence of individual ego and the non-existence of projected ego. This is known as peace, or twofold egolessness. It transcends both forms of ego. It does not mean euphoria, but relaxation, presence, and non-hassle. We will be going into twofold egolessness, and actually into 1.5-fold egolessness comes up later. But I'm not going to spend much time there right now. But you see, I, on its own, isn't doing much. When am comes into the picture, then things start to develop. It's actually pretty straightforward. We studied this in an earlier chapter on the Wheel of Life and on the skandhas. And he mentions here that in the grammatics of the skandhas, the language of the first skandha or form is me, the second skandha or feeling is have, and so forth. So this understanding of this kind of the actually very straightforward nature of the development ego reveals that egolessness is possible. Because when you go back to the beginning of it all, I is a story, and stories have existence only in our imagination. This here, by the way, is the third noble truth, the truth of the possibility of cessation of suffering. But going back to I again, if you look within yourself, all you'll find are stories and descriptions. There may be a subtle sense of a physical existence, but there's not really an I. And as a matter of fact, this is one area in which modern neuroscience has finally caught up with Buddhism and is in agreement that the sense of self is a narrative. It's a story we put together out of cherry-picked memories over the course of our life up till now that tell the story of who I am. He says the point of this is that nothing you can find that is I at all. It is empty, impermanent. And the realization of that can be a gap. The experience of gap. Now, gap cannot actually be experienced without an understanding of am, so you have I am again. You see? The gap that we may experience in meditation, on and off the cushion, is a moment of awake. Like the gap that may occur at the end of the out-breath. But you can't experience that as the gap because that requires an I to experience it. So, this again is how the I, the ego, reasserts itself. He says, the world says that you do not exist. You do not have a chair to sit on, therefore you can't sit. Now, once you realize that chair exists only as your attention turns to it, and your mind categorizes it as chair, there really isn't a chair except in that moment. And there is nothing to sit on. And that everything we experience is just like that, an experience. He says, there is simply nothing real taking place. No, absolutely 100% real things are taking place at all. They are not happening. Absolutely not. So the thought of not having an ongoing solid sense of self can be unnerving or unfrightening. It's hard to imagine that severing that tie would lead to the absence of anxiety, but it does. And I guess I should say, this is not the same as dissociation, a state where one is detached from reality. Everything seems unreal. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Everything becomes completely real, vivid, alive, and is experienced directly and intimately. That's because there's nothing between yourself and everything else. The ego is no longer there, moderating the discussion, keeping up a running commentary on events. Now, at this point in the reading, I had some trouble with this one. He says the loss of ego is a real loss. It is very depressing. You have lost your ego, your strength. I had a hard time with this because to me it seems like this is more like about the anxiety one would feel in contemplating the loss of ego. But maybe John can maybe John can enlighten me on this one. Because frankly, I have to just leave that there. Now the Abhidharma comes up here. The Abhidharma is just like Buddhist psychology. It's an outline of how our minds work. According to Hinayana Abhidharma, dharmas are not real. They are as real as if you had a cup of tea in your hand, as real as what you have in reality, but that is a temporary reality. Which is kind of what I was saying there. In your immediate experience, there it is, your attention shifts, it's not there in your immediate experience. Our minds are just always busy stitching it all together and filling in the blanks. See, as you become aware of this, it becomes apparent that everything in our experience is volatile, constantly changing. Thinking of it as permanent, as real, begins to just not make any sense. Now he says that is why egolessness is possible. You feel everything as surface, as waves floating back and forth continuously, but none of it is true or real. He's talking about this experience here. Things come and go, he says. Nothing is real but the awakening, the touch that wakes you up. And due to emptiness and impermanence, you cannot actually pinpoint anything at all. Okay, now, at this point in the reading, he loses me. I gotta say, I have to just pass on this. He goes into talking about mathematics, about zero, about closing the crescent of the moon. I don't know. What I will say about that is that there is a kind of mysterious or poetic quality to this description of emptiness, as there should be. Because after all, the experience of emptiness cannot be adequately described in any straightforward words. There may even be a problem with explaining it too thoroughly, actually. It's something that you experience. So getting towards the end of the reading here, because I've gone on pretty long, he says the higher level of prajna is like a sword that says cut both edges, cut the sword itself, cut both. You see, if we cut through the fog of ego, there is still someone who is cutting. I am cutting through ego. But in the end, there is no I, there is no ego, there is no cutting. You see, the sort of prajna is the sort of intelligence and wisdom that we can use to make an incision into the body of ego and finding out that there is nothing there. And that's what we're doing here. We're using our intelligence and our wisdom that develops in the practice to deconstruct this whole thing. And I would just like to, at the end here, quote the end of this chapter. He says, "The experience of prajna and egolessness takes place due to the relaxation of ordinary confused mind." Relaxation. But first you have to learn how to stop and be bored, how to sit, how to renounce. If that isn't taking place, there is no prajna. It would be like somebody composing poetry without learning the alphabet. So without meditation experience, there is no prajna. You cannot just jump into prajna so easily. You need gut level experience. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. John?
Thanks, Barry. I'd like to do something a little bit different. In fact, I feel that these two chapters are so profound and meaningful that I'm hoping you're not going to be upset. I'd like to change things around and not teach the second chapter that I was going to talk about tonight. Do it next week. I feel that this chapter is so deep, the one that Barry presented, and I thought he presented it very well. And there are some very difficult parts in it. That what I'd like to do is to just make a few comments more about this chapter and then have a discussion. But before we do that, before I even say anything, I'd like to just guide you in a meditation. So if you could take a good meditation posture, and this is going to feel very familiar, I think. It's important to have a good posture because it disposes our minds to be relaxed and awake and natural. And it's also brings us into awareness of our bodies. When we're unaware of our bodies, we take any old posture, whatever it might be, but we're asked to take a particular posture when we meditate. And so we become present more in order to take that posture. And that posture is a posture of awakening, of being alert, upright, erect. He talks in the next chapter, we'll get to that, I guess, next week, about cheerfulness and how essential it is. And cheerfulness is part of this posture. So taking a good posture, a meditation posture, wherever you may be, see whatever is happening. And whatever is happening in a space, the space of this present moment, here and now, in this room, at this time. And what's ever happening is really a rising of one of the 6 possible knowables. These arise in the moment, from time to time. Some of them won't be arising right now, like smells perhaps, or tastes. They'll be arising at other times when you walk into your kitchen and sit down for a meal or whatever it might be. But others of them are happening, and they happen all the time, like sights as soon as we open our eyes. And the sights are always changing because our view is changing as you turn your head, as your eyes move. as the light shifts. Sounds are arising, usually in the present moment. It's hardly ever completely silent. And the sounds arise in the moment, temporarily, from moment to moment, like these words. Everything is arising and passing away in the present moment, which is why when he talked about the second egolessness, the egolessness of dharmas, the egolessness of objects, they have no true existence. Everything is just a constant presentation, a phantasm happening, presenting itself to our senses, the five senses, and the sixth, which is mind itself. A constantly shifting, changing, never lasting from one instant to the next. Utter impermanence. And that is what is meant by the egolessness of dharmas, by the egolessness of other, that nothing has any true ongoing being. We think, this piece of cloth exists in some way and has an ongoing existence, but that's just an idea, just a story that we tell ourselves. The fact of what we experience in the present, which is the only thing that's truly real, is that here it is, now it's not. A constant changing presentation, like a movie on a screen. So we sit here in our meditation, we bring our minds into this space, aware, and we rest here in the space. And the presentations happen. The words, the physical objects, maybe smells and tastes, bodily sensations. Now that I mention it, you're aware of your bottom on whatever you're sitting, comes and goes. You could say, well, now I'm aware of it because John directed my attention to it. That's one way of looking at it. But another way is the sensation of this chair just appeared and then it disappeared because I was thinking of something else or aware of something else. This constant presentation of awareness of things arising and passing. There's a slogan that they say in the Vipashyana. Sometimes when you're practicing, you might say this slogan, you say, nothing exists, meaning nothing has any true ongoing being, and yet things arise. Things arise, and yet they do not exist. They have no ongoing being, except in our imagination. And so the act of meditation is to let go of that imaginary story that we tell and just come back into pure awareness of what's going on now. Here we are in this space. Everything is arising and passing in the moment. This is awareness. This is Vipashyana. It's the true meaning of Vipashyana. It does it for us. If you think you're doing it, that's another dream. That's another ego trip. I'm meditating. I'm being aware. Rather, what we're doing is letting all of those thoughts go. And it's doing it for us, this awareness. It's so easy. It's the ultimate easiness. They call this the lazy person's path to enlightenment. Because you're giving up effort altogether and just coming back to bedrock, what we already are. This is Vipashyana. And the intelligence that infuses this, it's not that sees it. This is lit. Your computer screen, your image of me right now, the sounds of these words, all of those things are lit with knowingness. You don't have to know them. They're just automatically there, lit, glowing, as it were. for you and for me, for everybody. That is prajna. That it's the quality that all things have as they arise in space and pass away in the instant. They present themselves, everything. That is prajna. There is no knower. There is nothing in particular that's known. Everything is a constant display. And it's lit by knowingness. And the ability to see that intelligently and to discriminate black from white, loud from soft, all of these things are the intelligence of prajna. So let's just do it for a second. We're resting here in the space. The space does it for us. The phenomena that arise in the space do it for us. They don't even do it for us. They just do it. There's no need for us, for I. There's just this presentation. This is what is meant by egolessness. The unnecessary quality of the I statement. When one begins to realize it, it keeps coming up out of habit because we've got a lot of habit developed. But that habit is becoming weaker and weaker over time with practice. I wanted to read one thing that he said that I thought was terrific. He says, remember, the translation that he's using of prajna is discriminating awareness. It's awareness, it's right here. It's discriminating because it sees black from white, loud from soft, sweet from sour, whatever it may be. All of those things are known so clearly in the absence of I, in the absence of thought. They become much more vivid. And he says the idea of discriminating awareness, this is, he calls it higher prajna, because there's lower prajna, which is just sort of clever intellectual intelligence, you know, the ability to do math, the ability to read a book and tell you what it said. But this higher prajna is the clarity of the world as it reveals itself in the absence of I and thought. And he says the idea of discriminating awareness, higher prajna, which develops out of Vipashyana. See, we practice coming into this space of awareness, this intelligence develops, is that this awareness becomes a natural state of being rather than a person developing awareness. You don't develop it. It's already there. Any attempt to develop anything just obscures it. We are coming back to our Buddha nature. It's so beautiful. This is our inheritance, which he talks about in the next chapter. All of us. It's our inheritance that we're coming back to. It's our being. It's our freedom, because we are becoming free from the need to improve ourselves. That is such a curse. The feeling that you have to make yourself better. We are coming back to our natural Buddha nature. And he says, this awareness becomes a natural state of being rather than a person developing awareness. It is not important for you to develop awareness. What you are aware of is more important. That's all it is. That is how you can step out of egohood. That can be read over and over. It's so beautiful. It's such a gift to all of us, a kindness. Heartbreaking. he says, again, later on, you could be a really free person, completely, fundamentally free. Free of what? Free of the slavery of I am, I want, I need, I should, I ought. Fundamentally free. This produces tremendous fresh air and freedom. I'm not quoting. And this fresh air and freedom are the product of mindfulness and awareness. Coming back to the present, that's the mindfulness part, and awareness, resting here in this space. Shamatha and Vipashyana. So prajna, here's a quote, is closely connected with freedom and with the practice of awareness and watchfulness. Watchfulness is his translation now of shamatha, that you're coming back from dreams. And awareness is always Vipashyana. Now, going back to these funny games that he likes to play. Oh God, we all, his students at the time, struggled with them. Some of them. The one that I remember most of all is the one about zero, and it's simply this: that if you think that this state that he's talking about, if you can call it a state, really, it's really what we are. It's not a state. It's not like some kind of state you move into. It's the discovery of the way things actually are, including me and the world and everything else. We just come back to this open dimension. But if you think it's an absence of ego, for instance, he's talking about, that's what he says is the wrong conception of zero. That's the mathematician's idea of what zero is. Zero is the absence of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's the absence of all that. And he's saying that actually what that zero is a zero that's something, because it's relative to 1 and 2 and 3. It has no meaning except in its relativity to those things, 1, 2, and 3. So it's a false zero. It's not a true zero. It's a zero that is actually sort of a thing, because it's in contrast to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and all the rest. He says true zero is actually everything. It's like you go through the what do you call it? What did Alice go through? You know, the looking glass. You go through the zero, and it includes absolutely everything, true zero. So how does he put it? Let's see. He says shunyata, which is nothingness, right? Shunyata means literally in Sanskrit, voidness, emptiness, nothingness. Shunya means void, empty, nothing. And ta is a nominative, turns it into a noun. So he says shunyata, nothingness, includes everything. It is empty and completely full. So, and then I think I had some difficulty with some of these games that he likes to play. There was the 0 and 1 game. There was the can you kill yourself game. And he used to say, no, you can't kill yourself. And we don't say, why not? You know, and the reason is because there is no self. It's ego acting out of fantasy. All that it's doing is changing the material world, this physical world, by emptying out, getting rid of this physical body. But it doesn't get rid of this, the intelligence, the space. Everything changes, and yet the space and phenomena go on, unpredictably, changeably. Then he talks about, let me see if I can find it. He says the higher level of prajna, that's this intelligence that infuses the space that we inhabit. Everything is one with it. The higher level of prajna, is like a sword that says, cut both edges. And then it says, cut the sword itself. Cut both. Now that's a complicated piece of logic. What he's saying is that you see the sword of prajna, Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, of prajna. He's the bodhisattva of prajna, Manjushri. And he holds a two-edged sword because that sword cuts through the two false beliefs, the belief in I and the belief in other. But ultimately, if you believe in the sword, then you're stuck again. There's I and the wielder of the sword. So ultimately what Rinpoche said is, it's a sword that cuts itself. And that's what he's saying here in this chapter, because ultimately you don't need it. At the end, you realize it was all a joke, a myth, a mistake. This belief in I and other, an utter fiction, a falsity, or as he once, as I've said before, bellowed at me, a lie. He said, it is not a matter of counting, but of catching up with your present moment, right where you are, which is perfect zero. It's perfect zero because there is no I and there is no other. They are just fictions. They are just speech, stories that we tell ourselves. And in reality, all of this is this gorgeous, vivid, constantly changing presentation. And this is what the Vajrayana is all about. And the Mahayana, which we're going to get into in a couple of weeks, I'm putting it off a week now by delaying this chapter, is about how you get to that perfect zero. That's the Bodhisattva path. And then the Vajrayana is all about what you see when you get there. And what you see is this gorgeous, beautiful, vivid, meaningful, symbolically meaningful world that's constantly telling you what it is, vividly arising and passing away in the present. He says, you cut this and that, and commit seppuku. That's the Japanese ritual suicide. Ouch, he says. He says, the notion of egolessness is empty. There's no ego. But it is, at the same time, it is utterly and completely full, because when you get rid of ego, you've got the whole world as it arises in this present moment. It's like you get this treasure. Egoless is not understood to be a loss. And he says personally, he says, I've experienced it. It's great. I've experienced it, he says, and it is not deprivation at all. It is like giving birth, an expression of both loss and gain together. It is full and empty at the same time. The woman loses and gains the child. It is full and empty at the same time, he says. Empty of I and other, of the myth, of the mistake of ego, and full of all of this. So you lose that mistake, that belief in I and other, which enslaved us. It kept us constantly involved in these games, these stories, these painful stories. And instead now we're released. And the images in the Vajrayana and the Tantra of people who have been released are people playing with the sun and moon. And they talk about play, rolpa, in Tibetan, that these great siddhas, these enlightened people who have discovered egolessness of self and dharmas, that all that's left is to play with the universe, interact constantly, choicelessly, and play. So listening to Barry, I just felt this was so profound that I didn't want to pass over it again. And I thought, Barry, I thought you did a great job with it. It's just that it's so deep, it can go on forever. This chapter was a humdinger, to use a technical term. I'm sure there's much more that could be said. I encourage you to go read it again. I've read it 3 or 4 times at least. And I just keep finding more and more in it. He says at the end, prajna and egolessness are produced by the relaxation of ordinary confused mind. When we begin to let that go and come present and see that it's not me being aware, but it's simply the world arising. The world does it for us. And then he says, but first you have to learn, and Barry quoted this, how to stop and be bored, how to sit, how to renounce. If that isn't taking place, there is no prajna. So without meditation experience, there is no prajna. You need gut level experience. So I'm going to stop there too. I hope you're not disappointed. I just couldn't it felt too trivializing to move on into another chapter. So we can have a discussion.
John?
Okay. Hi, Judith.
Hi. I am perpetually not sure of the many meanings of Dharma. Dharma here seems to be events and what?
You've got it. The word Dharma has many meanings.
Yeah.
Even meaning social norms, that kind of thing, or the very essence of a thing, like the Dharma of fire is heat, But here, what it's referring to is a technical meaning, and you've got the right meaning. It's the discrete events that happen in life, these sounds, the feelings of your body, thoughts, they arise and pass away. Early Buddhists, at the Hinayana level especially, thought that these events had existence, minute existence, 1/60th of a second. But later in the Mahayana, as you'll find out, they don't even have that. They are just constantly, as they arise, they're already passing. Nothing has any true being for even a split second, even a 60th of a second. And yet these things, they talk about them, especially in the Hinayana, as being sort of discrete. These are the dharmas. The dharmas, they come up with lists in the Hinayana, in the Abhidharma, Abhidharma is the Hinayana psychology. And they come up with lists of them, like in the Sarvastivada, that's one of the 18 Hinayana schools that existed shortly after the time of the Buddha for a couple of centuries. They came up with a list of 75 truly existing dharmas. Now, when you get to the Mahayana, they deny them. They say it's bullshit. They say it's imagination. And you can see that, for instance, in the Heart Sutra, when they say form is emptiness, emptiness itself is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. They're saying everything is zero, and the true zero, which is everything. It's voidness, it's shunya. And it says, in the same way. And then they go through all the dharmas. They say, in the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Those are the five skandhas. And then they go through consciousness or emptiness. What's the next line? Somebody help me. There is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas. See, no dharmas, no I dhatu, no I consciousness up to no mind consciousness, no ignorance, no end of ignorance. They're going through all the possible things, and those are called dharmas. And this is the doctrine of emptiness. Now, they don't quite get to what he's talking about here, which is really Vajrayana. You're getting a prelude to the Vajrayana, which is that when you go through the emptiness, then there is this extraordinary fullness that's revealed in the zero, in the womb, which carries the child. It's this constant that everything is empty of I and other, and it becomes very full of this constant presentation of the phenomenal world. The six knowables. So you're right about that. Thank you for bringing that up. That word dharmas can be confusing. There are pillars all over India. I'll just say this, that were erected by the great emperor Ashoka, who lived in about the 3rd century BC. And he erected hundreds of these obelisks around India. You can see them all the way from the southern edge of Nepal down into southern India. And they are proclaiming the Dharma. And nobody's quite sure if he's talking about the Buddhist Dharma or if he's talking about some other kind of social Dharma. But the Buddhists like to say that he was a true Buddhist, and this is all about the Buddhist Dharma.
But what's depicted there?
What? It's just they're texts written in Sanskrit, carved on these obelisks. And they're usually about 12 feet high, something like that, 4-sided, right, coming to a point at the top, made out of stone. Hundreds of them all over India.
I don't think I ever saw one.
Huh?
I don't think I ever saw one when I was there.
Well, they're there. I've seen a few. I remember there's one, if you go to to Lumbini, this is the place where the Buddha was supposed to have been born, up in just over the border of India into Nepal in the north. There's an obelisk there. There's one of these Ashokan pillars is what they're called.
Ah.
I've seen them in South India.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Anyhow, someone else?
I had a question, John. I'm wondering if the same thing you're talking about with the emptiness of dharmas is the same as the emptiness of other, because I'm familiar with the emptiness of self, the emptiness of other, which is also, I think, the translation or the transition from the Hinayana to the Mahayana.
Yes.
Could you say something about that?
You just did, but
Okay.
I can say more. I can say it again. But basically, there are the two beliefs. These are called the two veils. And they're the two fundamental core errors: the belief in I and the belief in other. And they call, when they're called veils, the belief in I is called the veil of conflicting emotions. And they call it that because when you believe in I, you're caught up in all kinds of emotions, aren't you? Jealousy, hatred, lust, love, all this stuff. And these emotions often conflict. You get pissed off at the person you love, So that's the belief in I involves you in the veil of conflicting emotions. The belief in other, they call primitive beliefs about reality. You're primitive because you think that things actually have some true existence, when in fact all they are is these phantasms that are everything is constantly appearing and disappearing in the present moment. So these are the two veils, and they're the two false beliefs, and they are the foundation of samsara. And in the Mahayana, the whole discovery of shunyata is the rending of that twofold veil. That's why Manjushri's sword has two edges. It's not a one-edged sword, it's a two-edged sword.
Loring has had his hand up for a while there.
Okay, Loring.
Hey, thanks. I just wanted to say real quick, it's been a long, 40 weeks almost that we went through this book here, and it was a big commitment for you guys to meet with us every week, and I've gotten a ton out of it. I'm amazed by how much. I had no idea how ego-driven I was before all this. I had some kind of idea that things weren't right, but I get to look at a different angle at this now, and man, oh man. So I appreciate it. Really, it's made such a huge difference in my life, and my ego thinks I'm ready to go on to the next book. So we'll both be there.
Yeah, great. And just think about it. What they say in the teachings is we've all, you and I and everybody, been doing this for countless lives. This is just the latest one. Countless. So much so that everyone in this room, this Zoom room, has been the mother of everyone else in this room. How about that? We've all been each other's mothers at one time or another, in one life or another. That's why, and that's a teaching, excuse me, Barry, I'll just finish, that they say you should be compassionate to everyone because everyone has been your mother. Now, modern days, sometimes my relationship with mom is not as great as it was cracked up to be, but you get the idea. Sorry, Barry.
So Danielle has something, I think.
So I'm trying to conceptualize in my brain living in egolessness. And so, like, if I were talking to someone who I have a history with, who I'm not really liking, if I was like totally myself without all my stories, all my background, everything, and I was talking to that person without seeing anything of their story that I'm like connected to, I'm trying to see them just as they are right now. Would that be like living egolessness?
Barry, you want to?
I think you're pretty close there, really. You know, that's certainly an element of it.
Yeah.
You know, it involves tremendous giving up of security, of this story. I is always looking for security. And it might, in the first blush or for a while, feel very scary. I mean, because you're giving up all these reference points.
Like, I don't want to give up. I don't want to get, like, if I was not being egoless, I wouldn't want to give up my trip of being like, oh, she wronged me. And I have to give that up. And that's kind of hard. Like you said before, it's hard to give these stories up because it's our entertainment, you know? So I got to talk to her without anything of my past and try to just be right here.
I just thought of something that I think it's more about entering into the interaction without an agenda.
Yeah. But because we're frail human beings, there are halfway steps that will help us take the leap. You know, in the chant, it says renunciation is the foot of meditation, as is taught. And they're not talking about giving up food and wealth. They're talking about giving up me and my self-aggrandizement, my wanting to surround myself with stuff that's going to make me feel solid and substantial. But there are teachings that will help you like this. So for instance, maybe at some point we should do the teachings of Atisha Dipankara, who one of his students at the time in the 12th century codified his teachings into 57 slogans. You can buy these, by the way. I've got a deck of them sitting over here on cards. And every once in a while, I'll just shuffle it and take out a new one. And one of them is, and this is sort of giving you an example of how you can work with this kind of thing, is one of the slogans is my favorite probably, drive all blames into one. And the one is me. And what that means is, whenever you're in a conflict situation, like somebody's really pissing you off, they're insulting you, they're doing something to you, you take the blame, even though you know it's not your fault, it's their fault. But you say, it's my fault. I see Laura, I think you're smiling. Once you try this, it's really, really interesting. What I've found is 99 times out of 100, there is no practical repercussion. It's not like you have to be afraid of something. But it's so hard. And yet, when you do it, you take the blame, even though you know that other person's at fault, but you say, I'm sorry, it was my fault. And it changes everything. It explodes. It can. There's no promises here. That's what makes it so scary. It can explode the whole dynamic that was happening between you and that other person. And something else utterly opens up and is revealed. I haven't done it in a while. I should remember to do it.
Okay, John.
Thank you.
Dan had his hand raised, and Dee also.
Dan.
Yeah. First of all, that was a great question, Danielle. I think anybody who has either a partner or children or parents or anybody would find that situation so impossible that it's a hard question to answer. Imagine a relationship without conflict. The thing you said before, John, about the lazy man's path or the lazy person's path to enlightenment. I understand the hyperbole and I understand the point that they're trying to make, but it's the path to enlightenment also includes studying the view, right? And that's anything but lazy. And it seems like it's almost, while I understand the point that's trying to be made, it's leaving out like this huge segment of what enlightenment is about too. I think it's just a reaction. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of leaving out the shamatha stage, as it were, figuratively speaking, of effort, of getting your butt down on the cushion, of in a regular way, of encountering boredom, all of that. But ultimately, what it's saying is that the awareness that we are seeking, the state of mind, is effortless. We just have to get to it through effort.
Right. Yeah. The foundation. Yeah.
Dee?
Thanks.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for a great session. This is actually my first time attending the class live, and it was very enlightening indeed. I have two questions. So the first one, I wanted to follow up on Danielle's questions and your comments. Like, are you also referring to the karmic dynamic between the two people when you admit fault when it's actually not yours? Or is it just more that it somehow transformed the other person's reaction towards you? But I am hoping that it goes deeper than that. And also the second one is, again, to the question of easy lazy man's enlightenment, because I think I read ahead in the books, and it seems that the path put forward is actually the tantra path, which means that it's actually more faster but more dangerous to enlightenment. Can you speak more about that, or is that like when we actually get to that part of the third book? Thank you.
Barry, do you want to say anything, or should? Laura, too.
Yeah, Laura.
There you are.
I don't want to say anything. Thank you for the invitation.
Barry?
No, I'll leave that for you, John.
All
Well,
right.
especially about the Vajrayana.
Why don't you take the first part? Let's just talk about drive all blames into one.
Yeah, what I guess what I would offer about that is that the thing I came up with there. All right, I have a little story here. I heard an interview with a woman who was part of a group of women who were meeting once a week, and this was at a time where the debate over abortion was really heated, and some of them were pro-life, some were pro-choice. There were tremendous arguments about what to even call those things, but they would meet. They were neighbors, and they would meet once a week, and they would talk and have tea or coffee or whatever. And the interviewer said, "How did you do that?" And she said, "Well, I make sure that I have no agenda." And actually, that's pretty profound. If you go into a conversation with nothing at stake of yourself, it really does transform everything. No agenda. It's not about me anymore. Nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to lose. You can be fully present.
Thanks. I'll add this too, that that technique of driving all blames into one, it has a big element, is that you are giving up your egotism. Because you're sitting there thinking, that person, they did this, they did that. They're a terrible person. I'm right, they're wrong. And you're thinking all that. And it's all about I. I'm the right person. That person is wrong to me. And you have to give that up in order to take the blame. So it's giving up that egotism. And it can be very hard. The most trivial kind can be so hard. Even when it's just this trivial little circumstance. Because you know that you are right and they are wrong. And then actually in that circumstance say, I'm sorry, it was my fault. Wow. And then the other person says, yeah, it was, or whatever they say. But oftentimes you're surprised at what comes out of the other person's mouth. So it's really not giving up egotism. Sorry.
I found something to say.
Please, Barbara.
It's from the stance of non-aggression. So when you say to yourself, I'm right, they're wrong, that's a stance of aggression. But when you say what John just very beautifully modeled, it's my fault, I'm sorry, you're putting a non-aggressive state, which it connects to what Barry was saying about aggression insists on a particular outcome. So you're not.
I'll give you an example of driving all blames into one, just so that you can practice it yourself. You can see how easy and difficult it is at the same time. And this is one of several, I just like this one. I was in New York, I was living in New York, and I got on a bus. And the bus was very crowded, and I had my hip operated on. I was walking with a cane, and there was no place to sit, except I saw this seat. It was one of those double seats, and a woman was in the seat next to the window, but she was so fat that she was spilling over into the other seat. And I wanted to sit down. I had my cane, I was having a hard time. The bus is rocking. So I went over and I sat down and I bumped her, like this, to get out of this. I said, and she said, you just bumped me. And I said, you're taking up two seats. And like this. And then we were sitting there, both of us fuming, right? And thinking, that other person's terrible. And then I thought, okay. I remembered the slogan, drive all blames into one. Oh, it was so hard. I turned to her. I remember we'd been going like this. And I turned to her and I said, gritting my teeth, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I was rude. To my stunned, I was stunned. She was stunned. She turned to me and she said, oh, I'm sorry too. I was taking up too much room. We had a conversation. And by the time I got off the bus, we waved to each other. It's just that kind of thing. And it's happened to me very much. I mean, I've got other stories like that too. I won't give them to you. That it seems to dissolve the aggression. No promises. No promises. And that fact that there are no promises is what makes it so damn difficult.
Your results may differ. We are running out of time here.
We are here. Okay, what time have we got here? Ooh, it's 7.
Yeah.
How many more people would want to say something? I saw Karen Sue.
Well, Dee has something else maybe?
Well, Karen Sue hasn't spoken and she had her hand up. And with Judith and Dee have already gone. So we'll this, and remember, we have our discussion group tomorrow night on same time, same place. So you can get in your car and come. Karen Sue.
So I think it's really quick, because what I wanted to say in what you just described was it stops the story. And when I've done what you're talking about as well, it just completely stops the story that the other person's creating in their mind and that I'm creating in my mind. And it's quite profound and really amazing. I recommend everyone try it.
I'm with you 100%.
Yes.
Atisha was a great teacher. If he had only given us that.
Yeah.
Well, should we end now and continue tomorrow night?
Yes, please.
Please come. Barbara, did you have something?
I just wanted to make a small point that in doing that, taking all the blame, if you look at a situation really hard, you can usually find, even if it's some tiny little thing that you may have been at fault at, if you can find one little tiny thing, it makes it a little bit easier to take the blame, because you can be thinking to yourself, well, it's just a tiny little thing that I was wrong with, but to the other person, they're not hearing that part. They're just hearing that you're taking the blame. So that might make it a little easier to do.
Thank you. So we should close by dedicating the merit, giving the merit away. Sarah, are you still here? Do you want to lead this chat?
By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Barry. Thanks, John.
Nice to have you back,
Great.
Sarah.
Thanks. Good to be back. I missed you all.
Missed you.
See you tomorrow morning.
Early. Boom. So much to learn.